The elevator doors were closing when my coworker grabbed them with her hand and squeezed in beside me, breathless, still buttoning her coat. "Long night?" she asked. "Third one this week," I said. We rode down in comfortable silence. She got off on the second floor. I rode to the lobby alone, staring at my own reflection in the polished metal doors. The dark circles, the unwashed hair I'd twisted into a bun at 6 that morning. The lanyard with my hospital ID still swinging against my chest. I looked exactly like what I was, a 31-year-old woman who had been running on coffee and willpower for 4 years. I told myself it was temporary. My husband had told me the same thing when he left. "It's just 2 years, maybe 3, he'd said, standing in our kitchen with his suitcase by the door. He worked in offshore pipeline engineering. The company was sending him to a project site in Alberta, Canada. Remote location, rotating schedule, 2 months on, 3 weeks off. The pay was almost double what he made stateside. We clear the mortgage faster, you cut your hours, we finally take that trip to Italy. This is for us." I believed him. I had always believed him. His name was, well, I called him my husband. Still, even now when it tastes wrong in my mouth. We had been together since I was 24, married at 27. He was the kind of man who remembered which specific brand of oat milk I liked and bought to when it was on sale. He left notes on the bathroom mirror with a dry erase marker. He called my mother on her birthday without being reminded. I was not naive. I was not blind. I was in love with someone I thought I knew down to the bone. The first year he was away, we video called every single night. I'd sit on the edge of our bed in my nursing scrubs, and he'd be in what he called the crew quarters, a bare room with a metal bunk and a small window showing nothing but flat gray sky. He looked tired, but okay. He talked about the guys he worked with, a foreman named Pete, the way the wind came off the plains and cut right through you even in September. I listened to every word. I kept the apartment exactly as he'd left it. I even kept his deodorant on his side of the bathroom counter because moving it felt like giving something up. The second year, the calls became less frequent. He said the signal out there was unreliable. The site had moved further north for a new phase of the project. Sometimes 2 weeks would pass. I told myself it was the job. I knew people in demanding trades. I knew how it worked. I picked up extra shifts on weekends and poured the money into our joint savings account, the one we'd opened together at a credit union in our neighborhood, the one we said was for the Italy trip and eventually a house. By year 3, I had stopped waiting up for his calls. I left voice messages instead. He texted back in short bursts. "Busy week. Miss you. Soon." I told my mother things were fine. I told my best friend things were fine. I told myself, repeatedly and with real effort, that things were fine. Year 4, I barely heard from him at all. And then, on a Tuesday in November, I found out that my husband had not been in Alberta for 2.5 years. I was coming off a 12-hour shift at the hospital where I work as a registered nurse. It was 7:15 in the evening. I was walking through the parking garage to my car, keys in hand, thinking about whether I had the energy to cook or whether I was just going to eat cereal standing over the sink again. My phone buzzed. I assumed it was my mother. It was not my mother. It was a woman I had never spoken to before, but whose name I recognized because my husband had mentioned her exactly once, about 8 months after he first left. He'd said she was the wife of one of his coworkers, that a few of the guys had spouses in the same region and they sometimes connected to keep each other company during the long stretches. He gave me her number and said I should reach out, that it helped to have someone who understood the schedule. I never called her. I meant to, I didn't, but she was calling me now. "I'm sorry to call out of nowhere," she said. She had a calm, measured voice, the kind of voice that told me she had rehearsed this, or at least thought about it for a long time. "I need to tell you something." And I want you to know I'm not calling to hurt you. I'm calling because I've been in your position and I know how it feels to be the last one to know. I stopped walking. I was standing between two parked cars in a concrete garage and the fluorescent light above me was buzzing. My husband and yours are not on the same crew anymore, she said. They haven't been for over 2 years. My husband transferred to a different contractor and your husband. He didn't follow. He left the project. Left the project, I repeated. He relocated, she said. I only found out because my husband ran into someone from the old crew at a trade conference last spring. They mentioned your husband had moved on. I didn't know what to do with the information. I kept thinking maybe you already knew. Maybe there was a different assignment I wasn't aware of. But I kept thinking about how I'd want someone to tell me. So I'm telling you. I thanked her. I don't know what else I said. I hung up and stood in the parking garage for a long time. Then I drove home and opened my laptop. It took me less than 40 minutes to find him. Not because I'm a detective. Because he had not tried particularly hard to hide. His social media profiles, the ones he barely used when we were together, the ones I'd stopped checking because there was never anything on them, had been quietly active. There were no posts on his main account, but there was a tag. Someone had tagged him in a photo 14 months ago. A backyard barbecue, paper plates, corn on the cob, a kiddie pool in the background. He was in the frame, laughing at something off camera, holding a can of beer. He was wearing a t-shirt I had never seen before. The account that tagged him belonged to a woman I will call my husband's girlfriend. She had not made her profile private. I could see everything. She had been posting photos with him for nearly 2 years. Farmers market trips, a Halloween costume they wore as a couple. I remembered that Halloween. I spent it eating pizza alone and watching a movie because I was too tired to go to my coworker's party. A birthday dinner where someone had written his name on a cake. A photo on a hiking trail where she leaned into him and he had his arm around her shoulders, and they both looked like people who had nowhere else to be. She lived in Portland, Oregon. My husband grew up in Portland. He had family there. I had always thought it was sweet, the way he talked about the city, the bridges, the food car pods, the way the light looked in October. I thought he missed it in the ordinary way people miss the place they came from. He had moved back. At some point in the last 2.5 years, he had left the worksite in Alberta, driven or flown to Portland, and built a life there with someone else. While I worked double shifts to fund the savings account we were supposed to use together, while I kept his deodorant on his side of the bathroom counter. I checked the joint account that night. The balance was essentially untouched. Small deposits from me, over and over for 4 years. A few withdrawals here and there, amounts I had always assumed were his personal expenses at the work camp. When I looked at the transaction history with fresh eyes, the withdrawals were not large, not frequent, and they stopped almost entirely 22 months ago. Around the time I now understood that he had stopped being where he said he was. He had not been taking money from our account. He had found another way to fund his life. Or someone else had. I did not call him that night. I sat with what I knew and I let it settle, the way you have to sometimes when something is too large to react to immediately. I am a nurse. I have held the hands of people receiving news that change their lives in a single sentence. I know what shock looks like. I was in it. I called my older sister instead. She listened without interrupting, which is something she is not always good at. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you need right now?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Okay," she said. "Then I'm coming over." She was at my apartment within the hour. She brought Thai food and a bottle of wine she didn't open because she took one look at me and seemed to understand that I needed to stay completely clear-headed. We sat on the living room floor with the food between us, and I showed her everything on my laptop. She went through the photos more slowly than I had. She was looking for dates, timestamps, context. She found a photo from a 4th of July 2.5 years ago, before either of us knew anything was wrong, where he was at a rooftop party in what was clearly a city, clearly summer, clearly not Alberta. He was already there, she said. I know. So the whole story about the signal, the crew quarters, I know. She closed the laptop. You need a lawyer, she said. Not tomorrow, this week. I contacted a family law attorney 3 days later. I had spent those 3 days doing something I am almost embarrassed to admit. I had written everything down. Not for any legal reason, not because I thought I'd need it as evidence. I wrote it down because I needed to see it as a timeline, needed to understand the shape of what had happened. 4 years of phone calls that tapered into silence. 4 years of deposits into a shared account for a future that was not being built on both sides. A job that had ended without my knowledge. A city he had returned to without telling me. A relationship that had grown alongside our marriage while I waited. The attorney was kind and direct. Oregon was not a fault state for divorce purposes, she explained, meaning I could not pursue additional damages simply because he had been unfaithful. But I was entitled to an equitable division of marital assets, and the joint savings account, built almost entirely from my contributions over the past 4 years, was a marital asset. She also noted that if he had misrepresented his whereabouts and employment status, while I continued financially supporting shared expenses under false pretenses, that might be worth exploring further. I left her office feeling, for the first time in days, like I was standing on solid ground. I had my sister with me in the car. She asked how it went. She thinks the account comes to me, I said. My sister nodded. Good. She also said I should be the one to initiate contact with him. Before any formal paperwork, just to open the line. Give him the chance to respond before this becomes a process. Do you want to do that? I looked out the window. We were stopped at a light. A woman was walking a dog on the opposite corner, a big golden retriever that kept trying to sit down on the sidewalk. She was laughing at it, tugging the leash gently. I want to understand why, I said. I think I deserve that much. I called him on a Sunday afternoon. I had practiced what I would say, but when he answered after 4 rings, sounding slightly confused, like he'd looked at the screen and wasn't sure why I was calling on a weekend instead of leaving a voicemail, all the practiced words left me. I know you're in Portland, I said. A long pause, long enough that I counted to 7 in my head. How did you? He started. It doesn't matter how, I said. I know you left the site. I know how long you've been there. I know about her. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that if there's anything to give. He didn't perform surprise or try to construct an alternate explanation. He just let out a slow breath and said, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't. And then he stopped. How long were you going to let this go on? I asked. I kept thinking there was going to be a right time, he said. To tell you. A right time, I repeated. I know how it sounds. Do you understand what I was doing while you were there? My voice was calm. I had not expected it to be calm, but it was. I was working extra shifts. I was putting money away. I was living like you were coming home. I kept the apartment the same. I kept everything the same. He was quiet. Were you ever going to come back? I asked. Honestly? Were you ever going to end it and come home, or were you just going to wait until I figured it out? I don't know, he said, and I believed him, which was almost worse than if he lied. He genuinely did not know. He had been living in the in-between for so long that he had stopped planning an ending. I'm filing for divorce, I said. My attorney will be in touch about the account. He said my name once, quietly, in the way he used to say it when he was trying to get me to slow down and listen. I hope she's worth it, I said, and I hung up. I won't pretend the months that followed were easy. Divorce at 31 was not something I had imagined for myself. There were nights when I sat in the apartment that had been ours and felt the silence of it so completely that it almost had a texture. I went through his things. He came, once, with a rented truck to collect what was his, and I made sure my sister was there because I did not trust myself to be alone in the same room with him. He looked different in person than I had been imagining. Smaller, somehow. More tired. Like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time without telling anyone. I did not ask about her. There was nothing to ask that I actually wanted the answer to. The division of assets was not complicated in the end. The joint account went to me. My attorney was right about that. The contributions were documented, the math was clear, and he did not contest it. It wasn't a fortune. About $47,000. Enough to cover the next year of rent without financial stress while I figured out what I wanted the next chapter to look like. Enough to feel like something had been returned to me. The apartment was mine. The lease had always been in my name. We'd moved in the year before we got married, and he'd been in the middle of a job change, so it had just stayed that way. I kept it. I repainted the living room a dark green I had always wanted, but assumed he wouldn't like. I moved the furniture. I threw out the dry erase markers. My mother was furious in the way that mothers are furious when something happens to their child. Not at me entirely, but at the situation, at the years of it, at the smallness of what he'd offered as an explanation. She flew out to see me in February, stayed for 2 weeks, and we cooked together every night and watched old movies and didn't talk about him unless I wanted to. Having her there reset something in me I hadn't realized had gone crooked. My sister kept checking in. She still does. Sometimes she sends me articles about things she thinks I'd like. Hiking trails, nursing research, random things about golden retrievers, a call back to that afternoon in the car at the traffic light. She doesn't know that I saw the dog. She's never asked about it. But I think she senses that I'm okay. I'm okay. Not in the way I was okay when I was telling myself everything was fine and it wasn't. Actually okay. The difference between those two things is something I couldn't have explained before all of this, but I understand it now completely. One feels like holding your breath. The other feels like breathing. I am 32 years old. I live alone in an apartment that finally looks the way I always wanted it to look. I work at a job that is hard and real and matters. I have a sister who shows up with Thai food and no wine when I need her. I have a mother who knows when to get on a plane. I have $47,000 in my own account. And I have the absolute unshakable knowledge that I did nothing wrong. That I was exactly who I promised to be every single day, even when I didn't know yet that no one was keeping the same promise in return. That knowledge, it turns out, is something no one can take back from you once you have it. There's a specific kind of humiliation that comes not from being lied to, but from realizing how long you believe the lie without question. I've sat with that feeling for a long time now. Not the anger. The anger came and went, clean and useful. It was the quieter thing underneath that took longer to work through. The part where I had to ask myself, how did I not know? And I've made peace with the answer, which is simply this. I didn't know because I was too busy being the person I said I would be. I was working. I was saving. I wasn't keeping promises that weren't being kept in return. That's not stupidity. That's integrity. And there's a difference that matters. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is that the way a person responds to being wronged says more about them than the wrong itself ever could. My husband made a choice to disappear into a comfortable lie rather than face an uncomfortable truth. I made a choice, once I knew, to face everything directly: the lawyer, the conversation, the paperwork, the empty apartment, the nights that felt too quiet. Neither path was easy, but only one of them I can look back on without flinching. I think about my sister, who showed up without being asked, and sat on the floor with me and didn't pretend there was a simple answer. I think about my mother, who got on a plane in February and cooked dinner every night for 2 weeks and never once said, "I told you so," even though she could have. The people who showed up for me did so because I had spent years being someone worth showing up for. That is not a small thing. It does not cancel out the pain, but it is not a small thing. There's a version of the story where I fall apart, where I let what he did become the loudest fact about my life. I came close some nights, but I had built something in myself over those 4 years, not just savings in a joint account, but a kind of quiet toughness that came from doing hard things alone and not asking for credit. That toughness turned out to be the most valuable thing I had. Not the $47,000, not the apartment. The knowledge that I had held myself together through something genuinely hard and that I could do it again if I had to. People ask me sometimes, when I tell parts of this story, whether I wish I had figured it out sooner. And honestly, I don't know. I was not a different person back then. I trusted because I had been given no concrete reason not to. The moment I had a reason, I moved. I think that's all you can ask of yourself, that when the truth arrives, you don't look away from it. What happened to me was not fair, but the life I'm building now is mine in a way it never fully was before, chosen deliberately, furnished the way I wanted, built on what I actually know to be true, rather than what I was told to believe. That green wall in my living room sounds like a small thing. It isn't.